work, we had a problem with not showing the things that you were supposed to show. So there's going to be a problem like this. It's going to be the last problem on the test probably. It's going to be a 16-point problem at the very least, because you're going to get points for certain things. You're going to get points for a table or for a chart. You're going to get points for being able to identify what the constraints are, the physical inequalities. You're going to get points for being able to come up with the objective function, which is going to be needed later on to be able to find out to either the minimum or the maximum that they're looking for. So this becomes a multiple step problem that we want to see certain things all the way along the line. Okay, so we have cabinet X that costs money, it occupies space, and it holds files. Cabinet Y costs money, it occupies space, and it holds files. You have money to spend, but you have restraints or constraints on the amount of space that you have. And then finally, the last question that they ask us, how many of each model should be purchased in order to maximize the storage volume? May seem trivial, but when they mention that term maximum or minimum, that's part of the objective function. So how many of cabinet X am I going to buy? How many of cabinet Y am I going to buy? And cabinet X has 3 characteristics, but one of them is part of the objective function. And that would be the volume characteristic. So I go back and start reading again. Cabinet X has a cost of $10 per unit. And it requires space on the floor of 6 square feet. And it will hold 8 cubic feet of files. That's a volume. It's part of my objective function. It's not part of the table. It's not part of the system you're setting up. Cabinet Y has a cost. It has a space that it takes up. And it holds volume. So this objective function uses the information on volume. And now the thing we probably might have been looking for to begin with, the totals. But see, the totals were kind of deceptive because there's a total for volume, and there's a total for space, and there's a total for cost, and so on down the line. But here, now we know that the cost is $140. I have no more than $140 to spend. And I got an office that's kind of small, and I only have room to be able to put 72 square feet of cabinets. This is worth 3 points. Your constraints are the inequalities you're going to have to use. $10 for every cabinet X and $20 for every cabinet Y. Cannot exceed the $140. I've been given $140. I can't spend more than $140, but I could spend all of it. And I could come back with some change. Who knows? So that's, even though it's not written as an inequality statement in the problem, we know it has to be an inequality. And 6 square feet and 8 square feet cannot exceed the 72 square feet. And the one thing that some of us forgot to put in, the X and the Y values that have to be greater than or equal to 0. That costs them to be 3 points on the problem. Because the constraints are in the table. But without that extra constraint, you haven't given me all the conditions of the problem. So this is 3 points, and that's 2 points. And then we're going to have to go to the graph in the problem with all the supporting information. So we had an equation, a system of 10, 20, and 140. And 6x plus 8y less than or equal to 72. And we have to be able to put that onto the graph, which means that we need intercepts. So if x takes on a value of 0, then y ends up doing all the work, which gives me a value of 7. If y takes on a value of 0, then x does all the work, which gives me a value of 14. So 0 and 7 since I'm using a larger scale because I want a little bit larger graph. And out here I'm going to go ahead and use a 1 unit scale. So 0 and 7 is going to connect to 14 and 0. I need a line, and I want that line to be blue. So there's my first part of the problem. If x takes on a value of 0, then y does all the work in the bottom, leaving us with a 9. If y takes on a value of 0, then x does all the work, leaving us with a value of 12. So 0 and 9, since this would be 8, then this would be 9. 0 and 9 connects to 12 and 0. So I need another line, but I want it red. And now I look at all the inequalities. Both of those inequalities are less than, so I know that the feasible region is going to turn out being this region that sits down here. And I know that I have corner points at 0 and 7, 0 and 0, 12 and 0, and then I've got this one. And some of you lost a point on your problem because you didn't support where that value came from. You tried to read it off of the graph. I hate to be ugly, but the problem you're very likely going to have on your test is not going to be a point that you can read off of the graph. So I expect to see this supported with how you came up finding that value. You used the matrix, the augmented matrix on the problem, to be able to come up with that value. And even though in this problem I could probably read it off of the graph, if I don't do a good job graphing the problem, I may not be able to read it off the graph. And you're not going to have a super large graph. It'll be kind of big, but if you get scales that are much bigger, that's going to be a problem. So I suggest that we actually take the time to go back in and to place that matrix in there. And it just so happens that I left that matrix in the problem, and it's all in there, right? So when I run the reduced row echelon on that matrix, that will tell me that I came up with my third point, which has coordinates of 8 and 3. Now my objective function was 8x plus 12y. But I'm trying to find out the maximum volume there. So if I'm trying to find the maximum volume in that problem, then I'm looking at 8 times 0 and 7 times 12 which gives me 84 cubic feet of storage space. I'm looking at 8 times 0 and 12 times 0, which means if I don't buy any of each, then I don't have any storage space. But I get $140 I gotta get back. 8 times 12, 12 times 0 gives me 96 cubic feet of storage space. And then out here, 8 times 8, 12 times 3, 64 and 36 gives me 100. So in this particular case, I have a maximum storage of 100 cubic feet by using 8 cabinet X's and 3 cabinet Y's. Be careful, please, because the maximum and minimum is not always at this point. It could be somewhere else depending upon what your function is. So if you assume that it's going to be the outside, you might find that you did everything right until you get to the end of the problem, and it's going to count your whole problem wrong. Now, I'm going to be able to restore some of your points down there, but you're definitely going to lose the 3 points for this bottom part here. And if you don't graph it and don't support this, there's 1 point of the 5-point process up here. So this part of the exercise that goes down here, this is worth 3 points, and this part is worth 5 points. So there's your 16 points that you're going to be able to get out of that problem. And this will be one that I have to look at by hand, whether you've got it right or wrong. I still have to pick up your paper, I have to go to your form, I have to look at the information you gave me, and if it's not supported properly, you're losing points. I had one student send me an email Saturday after I got all the stuff in, and they said my grade went from an 80 to a 32. What happened? I said, we're to 38, excuse me. I said, well, you didn't show the multiplication of matrices by hand, you didn't solve the system by hand, and you didn't do the lick of work on the graph problem, so you lost all the points for those. But they were all right, and you didn't do them the way we asked you to do them. So I really hate taking off points at the end, but I've been very upfront with you what we expect to see. And if there's a multiplication of matrices, we expect it to be done by hand. And if there's this one, we expect it to be done by hand. I don't believe you're going to have to solve a system by hand because we don't want to take the time with that. So any system you have to solve would be an augmented matrix, which again, gets you some practice back in this type of thing, okay? So could be a problem like that. In fact, I'm pretty sure there is a problem like that, but it doesn't require you to set up anything. It's just already there. You just dump it into the calculator and let it go. 25, 26 questions, somewhere in that vicinity, hour, 45 minutes to be able to deal with it. Practice test stay up until Sunday night. Then the non-for-credit versions come in. Your test is 10:15 on Tuesday. We start seeing people between 10 and 10:15. So look for my section. There'll be a sign that says district is over here or whatnot. It'll probably be printed on yellow paper. Have a great weekend. Those of you that have classes on Friday, I'll still see you on Friday. I'll send you an email about that.
Mr. Biscuits, how you found the inequalities from the word problem? How did you pick them out?